doctor is a complete schmuck who ignores facts. Fortunately for our side, there are doctors out there who do care whether they're patching up the victim or the perpetrator. Not that they're going to change the way they practice. They're rational enough to know that there's a difference. Rational enough to know that the facts are being used in a way that's not consistent with reality. In other words, the facts that we are being presented with aren't factual at all. If there are two things regarding education that are critical for us right now, one of them is that people understand that law enforcement is on our side at the line officer level, and the other is that people understand that the medical community is with us as well. Our next speaker is Dr. Timothy Wheeler. I'm not in the habit of reading introductions, but Dr. Wheeler's credentials are so extensive and so impressive that I feel compelled to, because I don't want to leave anything out. So I'm going to break with my own rule. I'm going to do that. He's a board-certified ear, nose, and throat, head and neck surgeon practicing in Fontana, California. Received his BA and his MD degrees at Southern Illinois University. Completed his training at Reserve University in the Cleveland Clinic. He's a fellow of the American Academy of Otolaryngology. Maybe he can correct me on that when he gets up here. Head and neck surgery, and a member of the California Medical Association Scientific Advisory Panel. Born and raised on a farm in Southern Illinois, he received childhood instruction in the safe and responsible use of firearms, as did most of us who were raised out there in the farm country. He's a target shooter. He's completed the Hunter Safety Training Program, the California Department of Fish and Game. Also, he's a graduate of Masad Ayub's Lethal Force Institute, LF1. It's a 40-hour training program in the legal, moral, ethical, and practical parameters of the use of lethal force by private citizens in self-defense. He's not only a doctor, he's not only a well-credentialed doctor, but he's one of the few doctors who's actually held a firearm in his hands, knows how to use it, and knows the facts. He's the project director of Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership. That's a project of the Claremont Institute for the Study of Statesmanship and Political Philosophy. It's a political research organization located in Claremont, California. The organization was formed to serve as an antidote to junk science in the debate over firearms, directing attention instead to the means of crime control that is suited to a free people, controlling crime by controlling criminals, believe it or not. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Dr. Timothy Wheeler to speak on, here we go, Dr. Timothy Wheeler to speak on gun ownership, a political disease. There we go.
Thank you, John. And thank you, Brass Roots, for having me here today. You know, we're going to school again today here. Excuse me. I was at a medical conference not too long ago, and there was a doctor who got up and said, "Violence is a medical problem." And I said, "Oh, really?" Well, if violence is a medical problem, then I should be able to write a prescription for a self-defense firearm for every qualified man and woman, right? And a year's supply of ammunition with refills. That's when they told me to sit down. I want to particularly thank the legislators who came out here today to participate in this. Sometimes it's not easy for legislators to do that, and I understand it. But part of what you're going to get today for taking the trouble and the time to attend is a different perspective on the so-called public health issue of firearms ownership. Everywhere I go to speak, Somebody somewhere asks me, what is Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership, and why would a group of doctors and scientists be concerned at all about firearms? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because we've seen a change in the way that organized medicine views firearms and firearm owners. We've heard prominent physicians that we used to respect get up and proclaim firearms to be some kind of public health problem, like some sort of deadly germ. We saw major medical societies like the American Medical Association and the American Academy of Pediatrics reject the standards of scientific conduct and throw their efforts into not limiting human disease, but limiting human freedom. And as I'm going to show you later, Michigan's own state medical society has now joined in the medical war against your gun owners' rights. Slowly, these medical activists try to increase their power over the everyday lives of Americans. They seek new laws which would create new crimes, like the crime of owning a handgun without a trigger lock, or owning a rifle that has a magazine that contains more than 10 rounds. You know, John mentioned I'm a member of the California Medical Association. I'm also a member of that body's House of Delegates, which formulates the official policy for the CMA, California Medical Association. And the CMA is generally ranked either number 1 or number 2 among the lobbies in Sacramento. Little background there. Well, anyway, last March I was at the annual session of the House of Delegates for the California Medical Association, and I saw a doctor get up and propose a resolution which would make it a crime for children to go rollerblading without a helmet, elbow pads, knee pads, wrist guards, and gloves. The instinct of these public health doctors is to try to gain more and more control in the daily lives of regular citizens, but their number 1 target is firearms. That's why about 4 years ago, a group of doctors out in California formed Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership. And soon we became a project of the Claremont Institute, which, as John said, is a think tank out in the Los Angeles area. The Claremont Institute is dedicated to restoring the founding principles of America to their proper place in American life, and that includes the right to keep and bear arms. Our group, DRGO, works closely with the other doctors group, DIPR, Doctors for Integrity and Policy Research, and that's headed up by my friend and colleague, Dr. Edgar Suter. Many of the physician members of DRGO, in addition to their science, have training from the military or civilian training in the safe and proper use of firearms. This distinguishes us from the physicians on the other side of this debate. Today, DRGO has over 875 members around the country, and even a few members in foreign countries as well. I just got an email a couple of months ago from a gastroenterologist in Bangkok who wanted to join our group. We've tried to bring to medical societies and journals our expertise about firearms. And we've also tried to introduce to the medical establishment that large body of criminology research that you've heard about today. But instead of welcoming new research in the spirit of science, these medical organizations have actually suppressed and sometimes even censored these important scientific contributions. It turns out that our medical leaders' dedication to science is only a thin veneer that conceals their fear of guns and their suspicion of American firearm owners. When the subject is guns, these doctors drop the role of objective scientist and they take on the role of a social activist. With the passage of time, they have shown beyond any doubt their real intentions, and those are, first, they are willing to misuse their authority as doctors to achieve their goal. Second, they're not really concerned with firearm safety education. And third, their ultimate goal is to ban the private ownership of firearms in America. Now, these are serious charges, But let me show you some of the evidence that I have gathered over the last 4 years working with firearms issues in organized medicine. Number one, gun prohibitionist doctors are willing to misuse their authority as doctors to achieve their goal. I have here a gun safety pamphlet put out in 1994 by the American Academy of Pediatrics and the Center to Prevent Handgun Violence. This pamphlet demonstrates how some doctors are willing to abuse the patient-doctor relationship to prejudice a parent against gun ownership. This pamphlet's cover claims every 2 hours someone's child is killed with a loaded gun. Now, at this rate, there would accumulate 4,380 child deaths from firearms in 1 year's time. But the National Safety Council counted 784 child deaths in the year 1990 from all firearm causes. That's from homicide, suicide, accidents, and undetermined. The figure for accidents only, which is presumably the only number you'd be interested in with a gun safety pamphlet, was 236, or only 5% of the total child deaths claimed in the pamphlet. In other words, the pediatricians pumped up the statistics to 20 times the real number of child deaths. How did they do it? Well, we can only assume that they included non-accidental causes of death in their every 2 hours claim here, or they could have used an overly liberal age definition of the word child. They've been known to do that, including 24-year-old gangbangers in their definition of the word child. But the important question is, why did they do it? And the answer is right here in the booklet. It was so they could support the political message, which is the real message of their pamphlet. And I quote, "The safest thing is to not have a gun in your home, especially not a handgun." Number two, gun prohibitionist doctors are not really concerned with firearm safety education. In 1994, I introduced my own resolution in the California Medical Association House of Delegates, and my resolution asked the CMA to endorse the slogan of the NRA's EdCom program. You know, the program for children's gun safety we're all familiar with? Eddie Eagle, the cartoon character, tells children, if you see a gun, stop, don't touch, leave the area, tell an adult. Now, the EdCom program has been praised by educators around the country. A number of state governments have passed resolutions in support of that program. And the program has won 2 awards from the National Safety Council for its non-judgmental approach to firearm safety education for children. Still, the California Medical Association refused to support the slogan with any credit to its creator, the NRA. These California doctors proudly admitted their prejudice against the NRA and what they think it stands for. They were willing to reject a perfectly good gun safety program for kids to advance their goal of gun prohibition. Now, I ask you, is that the behavior of responsible professionals? Will you be the judge? Number 3, their real agenda is to ban the private ownership of firearms in America. Dr. Deborah Prothero-Stith is the Associate Dean of the Harvard School of Public Health, and here's what Dr. Prothero-Stith had to say about guns in her book, Deadly Consequences. And I quote, "I hate guns, and I cannot imagine why anyone would want to own one. If I had my way, guns for sport would be registered and all other guns would be banned." End of quote. Hate? You hate guns, doctor? Well, that's not a very scientific word. You know, I'll bet if a member of Grassroots said she hated anything, the press would probably call that hate speech, don't you think? Here's another one. You all probably have heard of the Federal Centers for Disease Control, the CDC. Well, CDC officials consistently deny that they have any bias against gun owners, and yet in 1993, the CDC's chief gun researcher, Dr. Mark Rosenberg, proposed an outright ban on gun ownership as a way of reducing gun violence. Dr. Rosenberg has also stated his desire to portray firearms to the American public as, quote, dirty, deadly, and banned, end quote. It's important for us to understand the context of these statements, to understand how really inappropriate they are. These are not man-on-the-street sound bites. These are not the spontaneous feelings of an average citizen. These are statements made by prominent medical officials with full prior knowledge of the implications of what they were saying. They can't say they were misquoted. They can't plead ignorance. The published statements from these CDC officials prove that the CDC has the long-term goal of banning the private ownership of firearms. Now, I should say more about the Centers for Disease Control because of the threat that that agency poses to American gun owners. The CDC has relentlessly pushed for more power and more control in the lives of Americans. This federal agency is a part of the U.S. Public Health Service. When I was a medical student, the CDC concerned itself with fighting infectious diseases like tuberculosis and cholera. And in fact, the CDC has a long and distinguished record of having successfully fought epidemics of those diseases. But now it's expanding its reach into that category of afflictions that they call violence. And now you see, violence is no longer a crime, it's a disease. And the CDC doctors say that guns, including your guns and my guns, are the germs that are the cause of that disease. The CDC began churning out its anti-gun propaganda about 5 years ago, funded by our tax money. The papers it publishes appear mostly in the Journal of the American Medical Association and the New England Journal of Medicine. And these are two famous, prominent medical journals. The editors of both of those journals have gone on public record as saying that they desire to ban handguns and that they are willing to use their influence to do it. But this year, things were a little bit different at the CDC. A group of doctors from DFRGO and DIPR went to Washington, and we testified before Congress. We testified about the CDC's gun prohibitionist activities, and the House Appropriations Committee was very unhappy to learn that the CDC had been using millions of taxpayer dollars to promote this gun prohibition. So Congress decided to teach the CDC a lesson. Congress cut $2.6 million from the CDC's violence research budget. That was the amount of money they had spent. Yeah. That was exactly the amount of money they had spent on gun research the previous year. And the House Appropriations Committee said, don't do it again. Well, you can imagine how the gun grabbers reacted to that. We saw articles in the American Medical News and in the Journal of the American Medical Association vilifying gun owners, blaming the NRA. It's all the NRA's fault. But somehow they failed to mention the real reasons that the CDC got punished by Congress. And that was because they misused our tax money to push a political agenda. And I'm sorry, but you're not supposed to do that. Unfortunately, it seems they've been unable to comply with the Congress's advice to stop attacking responsible gun owners. Just a few months ago, the Journal of the American Medical Association had yet another CDC-sponsored article knocking gun ownership. It simply proves to us once again that just like the fight for freedom, the fight for integrity in science is a never-ending battle. And this brings me to an unpleasant topic, but it's one that I think I have to tell you about to alert you, in case you're not already aware. The Michigan State Medical Society last year adopted as official policy the following resolution. And this is, for those of you who are interested in the number of it, it's Resolution 37-96A. 37-96A. And I quote, "This resolution asks the Michigan State Medical Society to oppose any legislation that would weaken the current laws regarding the ownership of assault weapons or handguns. The Michigan State Medical Society worked with various organizations to defeat legislation which would potentially make it easier for an individual to acquire a concealed weapons permit. This is your state medical society talking. Now let me explain how this medical society stuff works. This resolution is not just a statement of principle, it's a statement of action. The Michigan State Medical Society is going to take this policy and use it to lobby your legislators to keep you, the decent citizens of Michigan, from defending your families against violent crime. The resolution goes on to say this. It says, emergency room physicians testified in opposition to this legislation, that is, legislation to allow more concealed carry permits, warning that this type of legislation presented a clear danger to the public health of Michigan citizens. Emergency room doctors usually see the very worst results of the misuse of firearms. And I know, I'm a surgeon, I've taken care of gunshot wound victims, and I can tell you it makes a powerful impression on a doctor. But these doctors, these emergency room doctors, have used these negative experiences to generalize about all gun owners, about all of us. And that is where they make their basic mistake. In medical science, we have a word for this type of personal testimonial. It's called the anecdote. Not antidote, but anecdote. Anecdotal reports of medical cases are not dismissed out of hand, but as science, they're just not reliable. Good medical scientists know that anecdotal reports don't carry nearly the weight of good, controlled scientific studies. It turns out that there's a huge literature of good scientific studies done over the last 20, 25 years, carefully examining gun ownership by regular, law-abiding citizens and contrasting it to gun ownership and gun misuse by violent criminals. And almost all of this research finds that gun ownership by good people is not only safe, but it prevents violent crime and protects innocent human life. Now, what research am I talking about? You've heard about some of it today already. This is a book by two criminology professors, one at the University of Massachusetts and the other one now down at Tulane University. It's titled Armed and Considered Dangerous, a Survey of Felons and Their Firearms. This was a massive research project which was funded by the National Institute of Justice, a federal agency. One of the findings of the authors, which you've already heard about today, was that victims of violent crimes were less likely to be injured if they defended themselves with a gun. But apparently the Michigan State Medical Society did not consider this book before issuing its anti-self-defense policy. Here's another book. This one you may know about. This is by Professor Gary Kleck, professor of criminology down at Florida State University. It's titled Point Blank, Guns and Violence in America. Now, this book won the Hindelang Award from the American Society of Criminology back in 1993 for the best contribution to the field of criminology in the last 3 years. In it, Dr. Kleck shows that criminal gun violence is concentrated only within a very small subset of career criminals. Fewer than 1% of all guns in America are ever used in crimes. The Michigan State Medical Society knew, or should have known, about this highly publicized book, but there's no indication that they were or that they used it in their deliberations on firearm policy. Here's another one. This is the fall 1995 issue of the Journal of Criminal Law and Criminology. This is out of Northwestern University. This is another study by Professor Kleck and one of his co-workers that shows that Americans use firearms somewhere between 2.2 and 2.5 million times each year to defend themselves against violent criminals. Where did the Michigan State Medical Society mention this study in its deliberations? They didn't. But finally, the most up-to-date and definitive study of concealed carry is this massive research topic that almost every speaker has referred to today. This is from the University of Chicago. It's by John Lott and David Mustard, and it's titled Crime, Deterrence, and Right to Carry Concealed Handguns. That's pretty much on the mark, wouldn't you say, a study like that? It studies every single county in the United States. The findings from these research were that when states adopted laws allowing responsible, competent citizens to have concealed carry permits, rapes fell by 5%. Aggravated assaults fell by 7%. And murders fell by 7.65%. Now, I'd like to know, is the Michigan State Medical Society willing to reconsider its policy on concealed carry based on this major new scientific study? It's been 9 months since this study was published, and even longer than that since it was available to everyone who has a computer on the internet. We haven't heard anything yet from the Michigan State Medical Society. Why not? The point is this: these scientific researchers have all been praised by their peers in the scientific community. Their work has been heavily publicized, but still the public health doctors have never even acknowledged that these studies even exist, much less referred to them and acknowledged them in their policy deliberations on firearms. And so now we must respectfully ask the Michigan State Medical Society, why has the Michigan State Medical Society not acknowledged nationally acclaimed scientific research showing the benefits of responsible gun ownership? Is it not your duty as objective scientists to look at all the data and not just that which pleases you? And why does the Michigan State Medical Society's firearm policy seek to limit the rights of the good citizens of Michigan to protect their families against criminal violence? And why has the Michigan State Medical Society used its name and its trust to present to citizens and legislators only one side of this vital scientific issue? These are the questions that you, the voters and legislators, must ask when well-meaning doctors approach you with their anecdotes about gun violence. I ask you to use sound judgment and to not be swayed by their emotional appeals. Responsible gun owners in Michigan provide security for their families and meat for the dinner table and support for wildlife conservation programs. We must never miss an opportunity to inform the public of these benefits. We can counter the emotional claims by using scientific facts. And you can get the intellectual ammunition you need from Doctors for Integrity and Policy Research and from Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership at the Claremont Institute. Have this information available when you hear claims of the so-called public health dangers of gun ownership. Beware of efforts to reduce your rights to self-defense to some kind of public health issue. In the other states where this has happened, violence prevention or violence reduction has turned out to be a code word for gun control. Don't let that happen in Michigan. Well, how do you keep it from happening? First, you have your scientific facts ready, your intellectual ammunition. When you hear some anti-self-defense activist on a talk radio show saying that gun owners are a public health menace, you call in and give listeners the facts. Quote the conclusions of the Lott study that shows that the benefits of self-defense handguns. Tell listeners how the American Academy of Pediatrics has misled the public about guns. All it takes is quoting the National Safety Council. Their research shows that fatal gun accidents have been decreasing for the last 60 years and now are hovering at an all-time low. Second, and this is important, don't be afraid to confront these anti-gun doctors. Most of them just don't know anything about firearms, but you do because you're experts on firearms. The Grassroots Coalition can be a force for truth by tracking these medical gun grabbers wherever they pop up in Michigan, and then by using your ammunition of facts to set them straight. Tell them you appreciate their concern about your health, but they really should leave firearms to the experts. And the experts say responsible gun ownership by good citizens not only is safe, but provides positive benefits to society. The hard lesson that we've learned from all of this is that this battle, in the end, is not about science. It's about truth, and it's about freedom. That makes it a political battle. And your doomsday weapon in this political battle is your vote. Use your network of gun owners to build a firewall around gun owners' rights in Michigan. Show your elected officials that you cherish your liberty as much as you cherish life itself. The good, gun-owning citizens of Michigan are not the enemy. The pioneers who settled this beautiful peninsula came here and settled this place with their flintlocks and with their faith. And now you, the men and women sitting here today, are their descendants. And you have hunting rifles with synthetic stocks and telescopic sights. And you have high-tech handguns. But you're still the same decent, hard-working people that those pioneers were. And you still are possessed of the same God-given right to defend yourselves and your families that they were. And no public health policy can ever change that. Thank you.